Hello, Corky here. Talking to guitar players and people that are aspiring to be guitar players and sharing, the experiences that I've had and the things I've learned along the way. And that's going to be different for every player um, because it's going to be affected by whatever style of music they play or uh, wherever they live in the world. And so this is my world that I talk about. And you don't have to agree with everything I say. And don't try to correct me because I just know what I know, like what I like. And I'm grateful for any one person who might be interested to hear that the years taught me things that the days never knew. Uh, I lived in Oklahoma a couple of years. A lot of you don't know that. And I was an adjunct professor at a college, Indian college. I have a doctorate degree in intercultural studies and majors in Native American studies. So I spent 15 years on and off the reservations and in Indian communities throughout the United States. I've also traveled extensively through South America, Uruguay, Peru, Honduras, Central America, Colombia, and Bolivia. So I've pretty wide experience among Latin musicians. I'm also a trained Remo Health Rhythms facilitator, trained in Nashville, and I do health drumming, drum circles in healthcare centers and nursing homes and things like that. Schools for Autism did that. So I have this particular groove that I'm in, which is translates out to be social music. I consider myself to be a rock guitar player. I'm wearing a skull ring, which is kind of a fraternal thing among classic rock lead guitar players and so forth. And a woman asked me about it story the other day. So it means that I, kind of know that world. Although I'm not the best player, but I was more available. And one thing that was common between my preaching ministry as a pastor or evangelist and my music work, one thing that was in common was I was cheaper than anybody else, and I was often number 2 on the list to be invited, or number 3, but I was available. And so I was able to beat out a lot of guys in opportunities that was due to my availability and my flexibility, because I don't have to be a performer. I can bring music into locations and settings that are non-traditional. Like when I list my shows on Reverb Nation, I always am clicking non-traditional show because all my stuff's pretty much non-traditional. I'm not presently in a band. Not seeking to make more money in music. I make pennies by you good people streaming my songs online. Whether it's these music streaming services or what, and I can't remember all the names. I'm getting old. But anyway, and I've got bad allergies in Alabama, and I really apologize for that. But one experience I had in Oklahoma, that's what I was trying to get to, in Oklahoma was I was had a meeting with a woman who was a educational director of the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Woody Guthrie Center is a Grammy Museum. Now, if you live in California or Oklahoma or Mississippi, there are Grammy Museums there. And these Grammy Museums circulate tour things for musicians, like, for example, the Supremes dresses, the Beatles Sgt. Pepper uniforms, and these things circulate among the Grammy Museums. These museums are really great. Well, I was at the Woody Guthrie Center in Tulsa, which is a Grammy Museum, meeting with a person about music education, and she had to go to a meeting and asked me would I be interested in sitting in a room with all of Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitars and his gear, and just sitting there and wait for about an hour for her to get out of the meeting. So I agreed to do that. And so it's a real unusual experience to be in a room locked in alone with all of Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar straps, chords, guitars, amps. Not all the amps, obviously not room for all that. But, and it's interesting because I have always kind of gravitated away from artists that people make too much out of. But I've since come to really appreciate Stevie Ray Vaughan in just the last year, actually. I'm real slow about this. Those of you, my friends, who try to turn me on to new music, you know that I'll balk at it. Because I've got so many signature artists from the 60s and 70s in my day, and I'm an old guy, so this stuff doesn't always sound right to me. Probably some health issues there too. But at any rate, I was happy to go in there and sit with his instruments, and I interacted with Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitars, number 1, number 2, number 3, all of them. Strats, they were all open, cases are all open, they were all in the open air before they were going to be put into exhibit. And of course, the first thing I noticed was Stevie Ray Vaughan used gosh awful large scale strings. Like, I'm sure 12 was probably one of the smallest sizes of an E string that he ever used. He probably had 15s and things like that. And that's what we call that for you beginners. A set of strings, whatever the high E string is, whatever the diameter of it is kind of what we call it. So Eric Clapton has over time used primarily Ernie Ball 9s, which means it's a 9, I don't remember if it's a millimeter or centimeter, but at any rate, 09 is the high E string. And you say, well, why are you talking about strings like that for? Well, because it's important for you. You need to build up your strength, but you don't have to be macho about it. I think Stevie Ray Vaughan, was on a macho trip with those heavy gauges. I mean, it does give a better tone, but it's not that much of a better tone. And the general public can't comprehend that difference. So if the general public cannot comprehend it, it's probably just you and your interest and your preference, which is fine. You can play whatever you want. You can play, the action on your guitar can be, an inch high for all I care. I mean, if that's what you want to do, and you want to, press down and have to exert more energy. But with all these bends and then the Clapton overstretch, which a bend for me, typically is, pulling a string up 2 frets. And a Clapton overstretch would be going all the way to 3. Now, Hendrix, with his whammy bar and everything, did much further overstretches. obviously, than Clapton or others. Um, but I'd like to have a light gauge string on my electrics so I can do my bends that I need to do. If I need to beef the tone up, I can do that with my electronics or whatever. On acoustic guitar, I use a light gauge. Um, and I'm not interested in, um, you know, warping any necks on any guitars. A lot of people don't know that when a guitar is left alone, it's not touched or tuned for a long time. Strings tighten up rather than loosen up. And if you leave a cheap guitar, in a closet for a long time, the strings will eventually pull it in pieces because the strings, they shrink. They come to compress or whatever you want to call it. And they get tighter and tighter. So when you go a long time without playing, you pick up a guitar, the pitch of the strings are going to be just a little bit higher than they were. You're almost always going to go, to get in standard tune, you're almost always going to be loosening the strings if it's been a while since you played. And while we're on that, Danny Gatton, the famous DC Telecaster wizard, taught us that if you're going to be tuning and loosening a string, you need to go ahead and loosen it over and beyond and then pull up to the standard tune. Because if you just tune down to the note and get it in, the first time that you try to do a bend on that string, you're going to pull it back out of tune again. So you need to go way below, maybe a fret below or whatever, and pull up to that tune. And then your tension's going to be similar to the way it was before. These kind of discussions and thoughts, come from years of fooling with guitars, and happy to tell you that stuff. But anyway, I had an experience with Stevie Ray Vaughan's instrument, sitting in there for an hour interacting with this. And I do really believe that he had a wonderful experience late in his life, which made him more of a spiritual person. And so I don't have any doubt whatsoever that I was having some type of spiritual experience. Nothing spooky, nothing weird, nothing over the top, just sitting with, masters of American music. I mean, he's a Texas blues celebrity and so forth. But it was a great experience, and I felt like I learned things through osmosis, there. Call me what you want. So the type strings that you're getting, stretching out your strings, how often do you change strings? I go a long time without changing strings. I think we tried maybe once or twice to boil old string, take them off and boil them, and then get all of that skin oil and skin from our fingers out from between the wounds of the string. Maybe we did that. I don't do that anymore, but I sure don't change strings very often. And I know that many of the big time players, they don't change their strings that often either. They might have a techie that keeps doing it, but I don't like getting on the instrument and pulling everything out of tune. And it takes a while for those strings to stretch out. And so strings I recommend for acoustic, light gauge. You can do Martins, you can do D'Addario, whatever, all the different brands. And I think even the Everly Brothers, manufactured strings for several years. So it's amazing when you find string manufacturers. But at any rate, And I keep my guitars in a case. Right now, I've got two that I keep in stands. I don't really like all the dust. I don't sit around polish guitars. So, but at any rate, it'd be really cool if you get to go to Nashville and go to the Summer NAMM, North American Music Merchants Conference, and they have different big time players demonstrating instruments. And my son-in-law Matt and I went with some boys from Kentucky, and it was a great time. Get to see a lot of stuff, and you get to see the upcoming electronics. When I was doing my video yesterday about my stomp boxes, my pedals, my effects, what I didn't mention was a lot of people use rack mount effects, and if you watch Phil Keaggy's run through, you're going to see a lot of rack mount stuff. And I did use a rack mount for a brief time. I think it was the 90s. But I ended up donating my rack to a little old storefront church over in the mountains for their PA set. They didn't have anything with all the reverbs and things like that. And so there are rack mounted effects, and obviously there are guys on here who are out the roof on this stuff that you can follow after and see the real expensive stuff. See guitar players who have, amassed a real expensive guitar gear setup. I'm more interested in the person and the instrument and them being able to go forward with it. The pandemic has really hit hard on the bands and so forth who depended on shows and traveling. I was fortunate and blessed. I did more traveling between 2010 probably and 2020, that 10-year period. I probably did more traveling than I had ever done up to that point, because I was a local pastor for 26 years and didn't go hardly anywhere except maybe a mission trip here and there. But bands really depend on being able to get gigs to travel to, and the pandemic has hit us and places are closed down. So it's been interesting to watch the guitar players come up with different things, like on YouTube, like tunes. Instead of quarantine, they put tunes on there, and they do these little setup concerts in these small rooms, like John Fogerty does this, and you can see different people sitting in with other people visiting each other in small without going into a large hall. If you didn't get booked for a lot of big gigs, it's not really been that different for you, and especially since I've always been an amateur player, not necessarily professional, because I didn't travel every day or anything. Paid for all my albums to be recorded out of my own pocket and other pockets. And so it's really not made a big difference in me, except more people are paying attention to things like this video. And so during the quarantine, there have been a lot of people sitting home, a lot of them taking up guitar. I hope that one of them's watching this right now. You just keep plugging away at that thing. And if you're, trying, just take a solo or a song and look it up on YouTube, and you'll see a number of guitar players, often the original artist, demonstrating how to play that riff. And it's been really helpful. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. I recommend Leland Sklar's Facebook and his YouTube account. is a great thing to watch. Those of you that are playing B-bender tellies, there's a guy that does a bender bunker. It's really the best for B-bender telly, and God knows we're trying to learn how to do that. Um, Also, Arlen Roth has a lot of videos, and Arlen Roth is my favorite for beginning guitar. Um, for children, uh, my favorite is Marcy Marxer, Marxer, and last time I saw her was at NAMM, I think. Saw her also at the Music Therapy Convention in Cleveland, Ohio, a few years back. And she's the best on children's guitar beginning. She has had a set of videos in the old days, and now today you can probably get all this online. It's a download or whatever, Marcy Marks or beginning children's guitar classes. So as these things come to my mind, I'm getting on here and doing this, and down here in Alabama, it's raining cats and dogs. You know how I knew? Because I stepped in a poodle. Bye.